The alien queen approached me and whispered, "Would you marry someone like me, human?" Part 1 Drive. David Rodriguez had always believed that the universe held secrets beyond human understanding, but he never imagined one of those secrets would find him on a quiet Tuesday night in the New Mexico desert. The research station where David worked sat like a lonely island in an ocean of sand and stars. For 3 years, he had been studying strange rocks and artifacts found deep underground, things that didn't quite fit with what science books said should be there. Most nights, the only sounds were the hum of computers and the distant howl of desert wind. But this night was different. David was bent over his desk, carefully examining a peculiar crystal that seemed to glow with its own inner light when every machine in the lab suddenly went crazy. Computer screens flickered like old televisions during thunderstorms. The radio crackled with sounds that didn't belong to any human language. Even his coffee maker started beeping in a rhythm he had never heard before. "What in the world?" David muttered, pushing back his chair and looking around the small lab. The electromagnetic sensors on the wall were going wild, their needles dancing back and forth like they were trying to escape their dials. He grabbed his jacket and stepped outside into the cool desert air. The night sky was putting on quite a show. Shooting stars were falling like silver rain, more than he had ever seen at once. But something else caught his attention. About 50 yards away, the air itself seemed to be shimmering, like heat waves rising from hot pavement, except it was nearly midnight and definitely not hot. David took a few careful steps forward, his heart beating faster with each footfall. As a scientist, he was naturally curious, but as a human being alone in the desert, he was also naturally nervous. The shimmering grew stronger, and suddenly, the empty air began to take shape. What appeared before him was unlike anything he had ever imagined, even in his wildest dreams. A tall figure materialized from what had seemed like nothing, as if someone had slowly turned up the brightness on an invisible television. The being stood nearly 7 feet tall, with skin that seemed to be made of liquid moonlight, shifting between silver and deep blue like oil on water. But it was her eyes that made David forget to breathe. They were large and kind, holding a wisdom that seemed older than the desert itself, older than the mountains, maybe even older than the stars above. When she looked at him, he felt like she could see every thought he had ever had, every dream he had ever dreamed. "Do not be afraid," she said, though her lips barely moved. Her voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, gentle as a summer breeze. "I mean you no harm, Dr. Rodriguez." David's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. How did she know his name? How was she even speaking English? And how was any of this possible? Who are you?" he finally managed to stammer. The being smiled, and when she did, tiny lights seemed to dance beneath her skin like fireflies trapped in crystal. "I'm Zarath, Queen of the Endorian Star Collective. I have traveled very far to meet you, Queen," David repeated, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "You're from space, yes? From a world you would find beautiful beyond your current ability to imagine. We have been watching your planet for many decades, studying your people, trying to understand what makes humans so special." David looked around the empty desert, then back at this impossible visitor. "Special? Us? Have you seen the news lately? We can't even agree on what pizza toppings are best, let alone solve world problems." Zarath laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "That is exactly what makes you special, David Rodriguez. Your emotions, your passions, your ability to care deeply about things both important and silly. My people lost those abilities long ago in our pursuit of perfect logic and order." As she spoke, David noticed that he wasn't just hearing her words. Somehow, he was feeling them too, as if her thoughts were gently touching his mind like fingers trailing through water. It should have been terrifying, but instead, it felt strangely comforting, like finding a warm fireplace after walking through snow. "You're reading my mind," he said, though it came out more like a question than an accusation. "Not reading," she corrected gently. "Sharing. It is how my people communicate when we wish to be truly understood. But I will stop if it makes you uncomfortable." "No, It's actually kind of nice. David admitted, surprising himself. I live alone out here. Sometimes I go days without talking to another person. This feels like having a friend. Inside my head, Zarath's expression grew softer, sadder somehow. I understand loneliness. David Rodriguez, I have been alone for longer than your entire civilization has existed. They stood there in the desert silence for a moment, two beings from different worlds, both carrying the weight of isolation. Above them, the meteor shower continued, as if the universe itself was celebrating this impossible meeting. Why me? David finally asked. Out of all the people on Earth, why did you come to me? Because you study the past to understand the present. You look at old things and see the stories they tell. I have been doing the same thing, watching your species from afar, trying to understand your stories. She paused, her luminous skin flickering slightly. And because you are kind. I have observed many humans, and kindness is rarer than you might think. David felt his cheeks grow warm. I'm not that special. I'm just a guy who likes old rocks and stays up to late reading research papers. You found a baby bird with a broken wing last month and spent your day off driving 2 hours to take it to a wildlife rescue center. Zarath said quietly. You leave water out for desert animals even though you never see them drink it. You call your elderly neighbor every Sunday just to make sure she is well. These things may seem small to you, but they show a heart that cares for others. That is not common in the universe. David Rodriguez. David stared at her, amazed and a little overwhelmed that she had been watching him so closely. How long have you been observing Earth? 47 of your years. I was sent here as a young queen to study what my people call primitive emotional responses. But the more I watched, the more I realized that what we consider primitive might actually be the most advanced thing in the universe. And now, Zarath looked up at the stars, her home somewhere among them. Now I find myself wondering what it would be like to live a life filled with such beautiful, messy, wonderful emotions instead of cold, perfect logic. As the night wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain, David realized that his life had just changed forever. Standing before him was not just a visitor from another world, but someone who understood loneliness as deeply as he did. Someone who had been watching and waiting, just as he had been living and hoping. Both of them isolated in their own ways. What happens now? He asked. Zarath smiled again. And this time the lights under her skin seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. Now, David Rodriguez, we begin to understand each other, if you are willing. David looked around at his simple life, his quiet research station, his predictable routine. Then he looked back at this amazing being who had traveled across the galaxy and somehow found him worthy of attention. I'm willing, he said, and meant it completely. As they stood together under the falling stars. Neither of them knew that this moment would change not just their lives, but potentially the future of two entire worlds. All they knew was that the loneliness that had followed them both for so long suddenly felt a little lighter. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. 3 weeks had passed since that magical night in the desert, and David's life had become something he never could have imagined. Every evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Zarath would appear near his research station. Sometimes she materialized slowly like morning mist. Other times she simply stepped out from behind a rock as if she had been waiting there all day. At first, David had wondered if he was losing his mind. After all, what were the chances that an alien queen would choose to spend her time with a lonely scientist in the middle of nowhere? But as the days went by, their conversations became as natural as breathing, and David found himself looking forward to sunset like a child waiting for Christmas morning. Tell me about your world, David said one evening as they sat on the flat roof of his research station, sharing a thermos of hot chocolate. He had discovered that Zarath was fascinated by simple human pleasures, especially warm drinks and sweet treats. Zarath's skin shimmered as she considered his question. Imagine a place where every building is carved from crystal that sings in the wind, where the sky is always the color of deep purple jewels, and 3 moons dance across it every night. Her voice grew wistful. It is beautiful, David, more beautiful than any place on your earth. But it is also very cold. Cold? You mean the temperature? No, she said softly, cold in here. She placed her hand over her heart, and David was surprised to feel how much like a human heartbeat hers was. My people have spent thousands of years becoming perfect. We eliminated sadness, but we also eliminated joy. We got rid of anger, but we lost passion too. We became so focused on being logical that we forgot how to feel. David set down his mug and looked at her. That sounds terrible. How do you connect with each other? We don't, not really. We share information. We make decisions together. We work toward common goals. But we don't laugh together. We don't sit quietly and enjoy each other's company. We don't worry about each other or celebrate each other's successes. She paused, watching a shooting star streak across the sky. Until I came here, I didn't even know those things were possible. Over the following days, Zaraeth began showing David glimpses of her world through something she called a memory projector. It was like watching the most advanced movie ever made. Except David could feel the crystal city's vibrations and smell the strange, sweet air of her planet. Everyone looked so peaceful, David observed as they watched her people, gliding through their daily routines with perfect efficiency. Peaceful, yes, but also empty, Zaraeth replied. Watch their faces, David. Do you see any real expression, any spark of individual personality? David studied the holographic figures more carefully. She was right. The Endorians moved through their lives like beautiful, perfect robots. They were polite to each other. They worked together flawlessly, but there was no warmth, no spontaneous laughter, no moments of surprise or delight. It's like they're all sleepwalking, David murmured. Exactly, and I was sleepwalking too, until I started studying your species. Zaraeth turned off the projector and looked at him. Do you know what first caught my attention about humans? Our wars, our pollution, our tendency to argue about everything. Zaraeth laughed. That beautiful wine chime sound that David had grown to love. Your art. I was monitoring your television signals, trying to understand your technology, when I accidentally picked up something your people call a romantic comedy. To humans who clearly cared for each other were arguing about something completely silly. But underneath the argument, I could sense so much feeling. Love, frustration, hope, fear, all mixed together in this beautiful, chaotic symphony. Let me guess, David grinned. It was probably one of those movies where the people hate each other at first, but then fall in love by the end. Yes, how did you know? Because we make about 1,000 of those movies every year. They're pretty predictable, actually. Predictable to you, maybe, but to someone who had never seen people express emotions so freely, it was like discovering a new color. Zaraeth's eyes grew bright with the memory. I spent weeks studying that one film, trying to understand how two beings could feel so many different things about each other at the same time. David found himself smiling. So you learned about human emotions from cheesy romantic comedies? Among other things, I also studied your music, your poetry, your paintings. But mostly, I watched real people living real lives, families laughing together at dinner, friends comforting each other during difficult times, strangers helping each other for no logical reason except kindness. And that's when you decided to make contact. Zaraeth nodded. I realized that what my people call primitive might actually be the most advanced form of existence possible. To feel deeply, to care about others, to experience joy and sadness, and everything in between. We gave all of that up in our quest for perfection. But you humans, you've kept it all. As the weeks passed, David began sharing his own world with Zaraeth in return. He played her music, from classical symphonies to rock songs to silly pop tunes that made her laugh. He showed her movies that made her cry. She was fascinated by tears and asked dozens of questions about why humans leak water when they're emotional. He even taught her simple human games like card games and board games. I don't understand, Zaraeth said one evening as David taught her to play checkers. The objective is to win, correct? Well, yes, but that's not really the point, then. What is the point? David thought for a moment. The point is spending time together, having fun. Sometimes I let my nephew win when we play because seeing him happy is more important to me than winning. Zara stared at the checkerboard as if it held the secrets of the universe. You would sacrifice victory to make another person feel good, of course, wouldn't you? My people would consider that highly illogical. She moved one of her pieces, then looked up at him. But sitting here with you, learning this simple game, I feel something I have never felt before. A warmth inside that has nothing to do with temperature. That's probably happiness, David said gently, or maybe contentment, or just friendship. Friendship, Zara repeated the word like she was tasting something delicious. I like that word, but it wasn't all simple pleasures and easy conversations. As Zara spent more time on Earth, she began to understand the complexity of human emotions, including the difficult ones. She was there the night David received news that his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, had passed away in her sleep. I don't understand, Zara said as she watched David sit quietly at his kitchen table, tears streaming down his face. You are in pain because someone you cared about is no longer suffering. It's complicated, David said, wiping his eyes with a tissue. I'm sad because I'll miss her. I'm sad because she won't get to see her granddaughter graduate from college next month. I'm sad because the world lost someone kind and funny and wise. But she lived a long life. She was not in pain at the end. By all logical measures, this is a positive outcome. David looked at her, realizing that for all her intelligence and wisdom, there were some human experiences that couldn't be explained logically. Come here, he said, standing up and opening his arms. Zara approached hesitantly. What are you doing? I'm going to hug you. It's something humans do when we need comfort or want to offer comfort to someone else. I don't understand the purpose of this action. You don't have to understand it. Just try it. David wrapped his arms around Zara, and she slowly, carefully, put her arms around him in return. For a moment, they just stood there in his small kitchen, two beings from different worlds sharing a simple human gesture of connection. Oh, Zara whispered after a moment. Oh, I see. This is nice. Yeah, David said softly. It is. As they stood there together, Zara began to understand something that no amount of observation or study could have taught her. She was beginning to learn what it meant to truly care about another being, not just as a subject of study, but as a friend. And with that understanding came both joy and a growing sense of loss, because she knew that eventually she would have to return to her cold, perfect world among the stars. But for now, in this moment, she was learning what it meant to be human, one warm hug at a time. 2 months had passed since that first magical night, and David had started to think of his evening visits with Zara as the most important part of his day. He would finish his research work by 4 in the afternoon, make sure his small living space was tidy, and then wait by the window like a kid waiting for his best friend to come over and play. But tonight felt different somehow. Zara had been quieter than usual during their past few meetings, her luminous skin flickering with what David had learned were signs of deep thought among her people. When she appeared near the old oak tree behind his research station, her usual gentle smile seemed tinged with something he couldn't quite identify. Want to take a walk? She asked, gesturing toward the canyon that stretched out beyond the desert like a scar in the earth's surface. Of course, David replied, grabbing his jacket. They had walked together many times before, but something about her tone made this feel more important, more purposeful. The canyon was beautiful at night, with moonlight painting the red rock walls silver and creating deep shadows that seemed to hold ancient secrets. As they walked along the narrow path, David noticed that Zara kept stopping to touch the stone walls, running her fingers over the old drawings that previous civilizations had left behind. These pictures, she said, pausing at a section covered with handprints and simple drawings of animals, they're very old, aren't they? About 800 years old. According to our best estimates, David replied, the Native American tribes who lived here left them as a way to communicate across time. They wanted future generations to know they had been here, that they had lived and loved and dreamed. Zara traced one of the handprints with her finger, her own hand looking impossibly delicate against the rough stone. They wanted to be remembered. Exactly. It's one of the most human things there is, really. We all want to matter to someone. We all want our lives to mean something beyond just the time we're here. They continued walking deeper into the canyon, where the walls rose high around them and the only sounds were their footsteps and the distant call of a night bird. David had been coming to this place for 3 years, but walking through it with Zara made him see it with new eyes. The way she looked at everything with such wonder and curiosity reminded him why he had fallen in love with studying the past in the first place. David, Zara said suddenly, stopping near a small pool of water that reflected the stars above them. I need to tell you something. The serious tone in her voice made David's stomach flutter with nervousness. What is it? I have been thinking about something for many days now, and I cannot seem to find the logical answer. She sat down on a smooth boulder next to the water, and David joined her. My people sent me here to study your species and report back on whether humans pose any threat to our civilization. And what did you conclude? David asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. That humans are no threat at all to our advanced technology or our military power, in every measurable way. We are superior to your species. She paused, looking down at her reflection in the still water. But in the ways that truly matter, I have discovered that you are far more advanced than we could ever hope to be. David felt a warm feeling spread through his chest. What do you mean? You have something we lost thousands of years ago in our pursuit of perfection. You have the ability to form genuine connections with other beings. You care about each other not because it serves a logical purpose, but simply because caring is part of what makes you who you are. Zara stood up and began pacing along the edge of the water, her skin shimmering more brightly as her emotions intensified. For over 200 of your years, I have been alone, David, completely and utterly alone. I have advisors and subjects and fellow rulers, but I have never had what you humans call a friend. I have never had someone I could share my thoughts with, someone who cared about my happiness just because they wanted me to be happy. You're not alone anymore, David said softly. You have me. She turned to look at him, and in the moonlight, he could see that her large eyes were shining with what looked like tears, though he had never seen her cry before. That is exactly what I wanted to talk to you about. David's heart started beating faster. There was something in her voice and the way she was looking at him that made him feel like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to jump into something that would change everything. I have been studying your species for decades, Zara continued, and there's one human custom that I find both fascinating and terrifying. Which one? Marriage. The words seemed to hang in the air between them like a bridge that could either connect them or collapse under its own weight. From my observations, it appears to be a commitment between two beings to share their lives completely, to care for each other through good times and bad times, to choose to be together even when logic would suggest otherwise. David nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Where was she going with this? Zara moved closer to him, her movements as graceful as always but somehow more hesitant. I have watched thousands of humans make this commitment to each other, and I have tried to understand the logic behind it. Why would someone choose to tie their fate to another person? Why would they promise to love someone even when that person is sick or sad or difficult to be around? Because, David said, his voice barely above a whisper, when you really care about someone, their happiness becomes as important as your own. Maybe even more important. Yes, Zara said, her eyes lighting up with understanding. Yes, that is exactly what I have observed. And David, I need you to know that over these past months, watching you, learning from you, sharing these quiet evenings with you, something has changed inside me. She knelt down beside the boulder where he was sitting, bringing herself to his eye level. Her skin was glowing so brightly now that she looked like a fallen star, beautiful and otherworldly, but somehow also completely real. I have lived for centuries, but I have never felt as alive as I do when I am with you. You have shown me what it means to laugh until my sides hurt. You have taught me the comfort of sharing a simple meal with someone who cares about you. You have helped me understand that being vulnerable with another person is not weakness, but the greatest strength there is. David's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. Zarath, I know this is impossible, she continued, quickly, as if she needed to get all the words out before she lost her courage. I know that I am from a world you have never seen, and that my lifespan is far longer than yours. I know that my people would consider this the height of illogical behavior, and that your people might not understand either. She reached out and took his hands in hers, and David was amazed at how perfectly they fit together, despite coming from different worlds entirely. But David Rodriguez, she said, her voice soft and full of emotion, I have discovered that love is not logical. Love is not practical. Love is not something that can be studied or analyzed or explained away. The night seemed to hold its breath as she looked into his eyes. This incredible being who had traveled across the galaxy and somehow found him worthy of her attention and affection. Would you marry someone like me, human? She whispered, the words floating between them like a promise and a question and a hope all wrapped together. Would you choose to build a life with someone who comes from the stars but has learned what it means to have a heart from you? David looked at her beautiful, alien face, at the hope and fear and love shining in her eyes, and realized that everything in his life had been leading to this moment. All those lonely nights in the desert, all those years of studying the past while wondering what his future would hold, all those quiet wishes for someone to share his life with. Yes, he said, his voice strong and sure despite the tears running down his cheeks. Yes, I would. I will. And as Zara threw her arms round him and held him close, both of them crying tears of joy under the ancient stars, David knew that he was about to embark on the greatest adventure of his life. The question was no longer whether it was possible for a human and an alien to build a life together. The question was how they were going to make it work. But that was a problem for tomorrow, tonight. Under the watching stars and surrounded by the whispered stories of ancient peoples carved into stone, two hearts from different worlds had found each other and chosen love over logic. And that was more than enough. The weeks following Zarath's proposal should have been the happiest of David's life. And in many ways they were. Every morning he woke up with a smile on his face, knowing that he was loved by the most amazing being in the universe. Every evening brought new conversations about their future together, quiet moments of planning and dreaming that filled his heart with joy. But happiness, David was learning, could be complicated when you fell in love with someone from another world. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning when David was reviewing satellite images for his research. His computer screen suddenly filled with static, then displayed symbols he had never seen before. The symbols pulsed with a cold, blue light that made the hair on his arms stand up. After about 30 seconds, the screen returned to normal, but David's hands were shaking as he reached for his phone to call Zarath. They know, she said simply when she appeared that evening, her skin duller than usual and her shoulders slumped with worry. Who knows? What do they know? My council, the ruling body of my people. Zarath sat heavily on the old couch in David's living room, looking more tired than he had ever seen her. I have been gone too long, David. I was supposed to complete my study of Earth and return home months ago. They have been trying to contact me. David felt his stomach drop. What did he tell them? Nothing yet. But they are not patient beings, and they are not understanding of emotional attachments. She looked up at him with eyes full of fear. If they discover that I have formed a bond with a human, they will recall me immediately. And David, if they recall me, I may never be allowed to return to Earth. The weight of what she was saying hit David like a truck. He sat down next to her and took her hands, which felt unusually cold. So what do we do? I don't know, Zarath whispered, and hearing uncertainty in her voice scared David more than anything else that had happened. This was a being who had lived for centuries, who commanded technology beyond human understanding, who had always seemed so wise and sure of herself. If she didn't know what to do, then they were really in trouble. Over the next few days, things got worse. David started noticing strange aircraft in the sky, moving in patterns that didn't match any human technology he knew about. His research equipment began picking up electromagnetic signatures that made his instruments go crazy. Even his simple radio started receiving transmissions in languages that definitely weren't from Earth. "They're looking for me," Zarath explained one evening as they watched a triangular craft hover silently over the distant mountains. "My people have sent search vessels to locate me and bring me home. Can't you just tell them you need more time, that your research isn't finished?" Zarath shook her head sadly. "I could try, but they know me too well. I have never been late for anything in my entire life. Never disobeyed an order. Never put personal desires above duty. They will know that something has changed, and when they investigate." She trailed off, but David understood. "They'll find out about us, yes, and David, you have to understand something about my people. We don't just disapprove of emotional attachments. We consider them a mental illness. If they discover that I have fallen in love with a human, they won't just recall me. They'll try to fix me. Fix you how? They'll erase my memories of you, of Earth, of everything I've learned about emotions and connection and love." Tears were flowing down her cheeks now, glowing like liquid starlight. "I would return to being the cold, logical queen I was before, and I would never even remember that there was another way to live." David felt like someone had punched him in the chest. The thought of Zara forgetting him, forgetting everything they had shared, was almost unbearable. But even worse was the thought of her returning to that empty, emotionless existence she had described to him. "There has to be something we can do," he said desperately. "Some way to convince them that what you've learned here is valuable." "I've been thinking about that," Zarath said slowly. "There's one possibility, but it would require a great sacrifice from both of us." "What kind of sacrifice?" "You would have to come with me." David blinked. "Come with you where?" "To my world. If we appeared before the council together, if I could show them the bond we've formed, demonstrate the emotional growth I've experienced, there's a small chance they might see the value in what humans have to offer." "A small chance," David repeated. "Very small," Zarath admitted. "More likely, they would see you as a contaminating influence and decide that both of us need to be corrected." David stood up and started pacing around his small living room, his mind racing. Leave Earth, leave everything he had ever known, give up his research, his career, his entire life to travel to an alien world where he might not even survive? "What about your duties here?" he asked. "Your research?" "Complete," Zarath said quietly. "I've learned everything my people wanted to know about humans, and more than they bargained for. The question is whether I'll be allowed to keep what I've learned." That night, David lay awake staring at the ceiling while Zarath slept beside him. She had been staying at his research station more often lately, claiming it was safer than returning to her ship each night. But David suspected it was because she was afraid. Afraid that one night she would be forced to leave and never come back. As he watched her sleep, her skin glowing softly in the darkness like a nightlight, David tried to imagine what his life would be like without her, going back to his quiet, solitary existence, eating dinner alone, having no one to share his thoughts with, no one to laugh with or learn from or simply sit quietly with while watching the desert sunset. The thought was unbearable, but the alternative was terrifying. Leave Earth? Travel to a world where emotions were considered a disease, risk having his mind altered or worse? "You're thinking very loudly," Zarath murmured without opening her eyes. "Sorry. I didn't mean to wake you. I wasn't really sleeping. I was thinking too." She rolled over to face him, her eyes bright in the darkness. "David, I need you to know something. If you decide that coming with me is too risky, I will understand. What I'm asking of you isn't fair. What will you do if I say no?" "I'll go back to my world and try to convince the council on my own. It probably won't work, but I'll try, and if it doesn't work, then I'll spend the rest of my very long life remembering these few months as the only time I was truly alive." David reached over and touched her face, marveling as always at how soft her skin was. "And if I come with you, then we'll face whatever happens together. Maybe we'll change the worlds. Maybe we'll fail spectacularly, but at least we'll be together. The next morning brought a new crisis. David's supervisor from the university called to tell him that government agencies were asking questions about the unusual electromagnetic activity around his research station. They wanted to send a team to investigate. How long do we have? Zarath asked when David told her. Maybe a week, maybe less. Zarath nodded grimly. Then we need to make our decision now. My people's ships are getting closer, and if the human government gets involved, she shook her head. It will become very complicated very quickly. David looked around his small home, at the books and artifacts and simple possessions that made up his life. Then he looked at Zareth, this incredible being who had shown him what it meant to truly love and be loved. If we do this, he said, slowly, if we go to your world together, what are our chances, honestly? Maybe 1 in 100. My people don't change their minds easily, and they've never encountered a situation like this before. 1 in 100, David repeated. Those aren't great odds. No, they're not. David was quiet for a long moment, thinking about everything he would be giving up, everything they would be risking. Then he thought about the alternative, losing Zarath forever, watching her forget everything they had shared. But they're better than zero, he said finally. Zarath's face lit up with hope and fear and love all mixed together. Are you sure? David took her hands in his and looked into her eyes, these beautiful, alien eyes that had become more familiar to him than his own reflection. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, he said. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. That night, as they made plans for a journey that would take them further from home than any human had ever traveled, David realized that love really was the most powerful force in the universe. It could make you brave enough to leave everything you knew behind. It could give you hope even when the odds were impossible. It could make you believe that somehow, some way, everything would work out tomorrow. They will leave Earth together and risk everything for a chance at a future that neither of their species had ever imagined. Tonight, they held each other close and tried not to think about how much they had to lose. The journey to Zarath's world took 3 days, though David's sense of time became completely confused as they traveled through space at speeds that made his mind spin. Her ship was beautiful beyond description, walls that seemed to be made of flowing crystal, floors that felt warm and alive beneath his feet, and windows that showed the incredible dance of stars and galaxies rushing past them. But despite the wonder of traveling through space, David spent most of the journey worried sick about what they would face when they arrived. Zarath had tried to prepare him for her world. But how do you prepare someone for a civilization that considers love a mental illness? Remember, she told him as her home planet came into view, my people value logic above everything else. When we speak to the council, we need to present our case in terms they can understand. We need to show them that human emotions aren't weaknesses, but strengths that could benefit our entire civilization. David nodded, though his hands were shaking as he looked out at the crystal cities below them. Everything was exactly as Zarath had described, beautiful, perfect, and somehow cold despite all its glory. The buildings sang in harmonious tones as wind passed through them. But there was no warmth in the music, no joy or spontaneity. The council chamber was the most impressive room David had ever seen. 12 tall beings sat in chairs carved from what looked like frozen starlight, their skin shimmering with the same luminous quality as Zarath's, but somehow less vibrant, less alive. At the center of the group sat an ancient-looking female, who David guessed must be the chief counselor. Queen Zarath, the chief counselor said, her voice echoing through the chamber without any trace of emotion. You have been absent from your duties for 127 rotations beyond your scheduled return. This is unprecedented behavior for one of your rank and breeding. Yes, Counselor Vexana. Zarath replied formally. I extended my mission because I discovered something that I believed warranted further investigation, and what discovery could possibly justify such a breach of protocol? Zarath took a deep breath and stepped forward, still holding David's hand. I discovered that the beings we have been studying possess capabilities that our own civilization lacks. Capabilities that could revolutionize how we understand existence itself. A murmur went through the council, the first sign of any reaction David had seen from them. Counselor Vexana leaned forward slightly, explained. The humans have retained something we eliminated from ourselves long ago. In our pursuit of perfection, they have the ability to form deep emotional bonds that create a telepathic connection. Stronger than any technology we possess, David felt. A familiar tingling in his mind as Zarath demonstrated their connection, sharing her thoughts with him even as she spoke to the council. Through their bond, he could feel her nervousness, her determination, and underneath it all, her fears. Love for him? Impossible, said another counselor. Emotional attachments are primitive responses that cloud logical thinking. We evolved beyond such weaknesses millennia ago. That's what I believe too, Zarath said. Until I experienced it myself. The silence that followed was so complete that David could hear his own heartbeat echoing in the vast chamber. Finally, Counselor Vexana spoke. You are claiming that you have formed an emotional attachment to this creature. His name is David Rodriguez, and yes, I have formed what humans call love for him. But more than that, I have learned that this emotion is not a weakness. It has made me stronger, wiser, more capable than I ever was before. This is exactly what we feared, another counselor interjected. Extended exposure to primitive species has infected you with their mental instabilities. The solution is obvious. Immediate memory correction and isolation until the contamination is removed. Wait, David said, surprising everyone including himself by speaking up. May I say something? The council turned to look at him as if they had forgotten he was there. Counselor Vexana nodded slowly. Speak, human creature. David's knees were shaking, but Zarath squeezed his hand, sending him strength through. Their bond, you call emotions a contamination, but what if they're actually an evolution? What if the ability to care deeply about others isn't a step backward, but a step forward? Elaborate, Vexana said, though her tone suggested she found his words amusing. Your civilization has achieved incredible things. You've conquered disease, eliminated war, created technology beyond our wildest dreams. But in doing so, you've also eliminated something precious, the ability to truly connect with each other. David looked around the chamber at their cold, perfect faces. Zarath told me that your people live for thousands of years. But how many of you have a single genuine friend? How many of you have someone who cares about your happiness? Just because they love you? The silence that followed suggested his words had hit their mark. What I've learned from Zarath, David continued, is that love doesn't make you weaker. It makes you want to be better. It gives you something worth fighting for, something worth sacrificing for. It connects you to others in ways that no technology can replicate. And what proof do you offer of this connection? Counselor Vexana asked. Zarath looked at David, and he nodded. Together, they opened their minds completely, allowing the council to sense the full depth of their bond. David felt vulnerable and exposed as his thoughts and emotions flowed freely. But he also felt Zarath's presence supporting him, strengthening him. For several minutes, the council experienced something they had never felt before, the complete emotional and mental connection between two beings who truly love each other. They felt David's willingness to sacrifice everything for Zarath's happiness, and her equal devotion to him. They felt the way their different perspectives made each other stronger, wiser, more complete. When the connection ended, several of the counselors were staring at David and Zarath with something that might have been wonder. Remarkable, Counselor Vexana said quietly. I have never experienced anything like that. That is what love creates, Zarath said. A bond that makes both beings more than they could ever be alone. The council deliberated for what felt like ours. David and Zarath waited in a small chamber, holding hands and trying not to think about what would happen if the council decided against them. Finally, they were called back to the main chamber. Counselor Vexana stood to address them. The council has reached a decision. What you have demonstrated is indeed unprecedented. This emotional bond appears to create capabilities that our science cannot fully explain or replicate. David held his breath. Therefore, we have decided to establish a new research program. Queen Zarath, you will return to Earth with this human to establish a permanent embassy. Your mission will be to study these emotional connections further and determine if they can be safely integrated into our civilization. David felt like his knees might give out from relief. They had won. They were going to be allowed to stay together. However, Vexana continued, there are conditions. You both must submit to regular monitoring to ensure that these emotions do not impair your judgment, and any offspring from this union must be studied to understand the implications of genetic mixing between our species. Offspring? David whispered to Zarath. She blushed, her skin shifting to a lovely rose color. I forgot to mention that our species are compatible in that way. If you want children, that is, David grinned. I think I'd like that very much. 6 months later, David stood in a beautiful garden on Zarath's ship, which had become their permanent home, orbiting Earth. They had decided to hold their wedding ceremony there, suspended between two worlds, representing the bridge they had become between their peoples. The ceremony itself was unlike anything ever attempted before. They exchanged vows in both human English and the musical language of Zarath's people. David wore a simple black suit, while Zarath wore a gown that seemed to be woven from starlight itself. I, David Rodriguez, he said, looking into her eyes as they floated together in the zero gravity of their garden, promise to love you across all the stars and all the years we have together. You've taught me that love really can conquer anything, even the space between worlds. And I, Zarath of the Enduring Collective, she replied, her skin glowing brighter than he had ever seen it, promised to cherish the beautiful, messy, wonderful emotions you've taught me to feel. You've shown me that being vulnerable is not weakness, but the greatest strength in the universe. When they kissed to seal their vows, David felt their mental connection strengthen and deepen, becoming something permanent and unbreakable. Around them, holographic flowers from both their worlds bloomed in celebration as they danced together afterward, Earth spinning slowly below them and the stars of Zarch-Eth's home system twinkling in the distance. David marveled at how his quiet life studying old rocks had led to this incredible adventure. No regrets? Zarath asked as they swayed to music that blended human melodies with enduring harmonies. Only one, David said, smiling at her confused expression. I regret that it took the universe so long to bring us together. Zarath laughed, that beautiful sound he had fallen in love with, and pulled him closer. Well, we have a few thousand years to make up for lost